Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. We continue with Ms. Grant.
Good morning, Ms. Grant.
Good morning.
Ms. Smith.
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. Grant. I've got a few questions that have arisen from yesterday that I've been asked to put to you. So they're not necessarily fully in chronological order, but we'll hopefully deal with them relatively quickly and get back on to the rest of the questions. We discussed yesterday the stage 2 whistleblowing report following the whistleblow from Dr. Redding. And you, I think, might have said in that context, it's important to get a balanced view from a range of colleagues rather than just one side. Is that something you recollect saying yesterday?
Something like that.
Yes. Is that what you feel Dr. Decanting was doing in her report?
What I was trying to say yesterday was that the whistleblowing process is about investigating things that...
No, I understand that. I was just wondering if that's what you thought Dr. Decanting was doing, was she was getting a balanced view from a range of colleagues?
I think she was trying to describe the context within which the overall whistleblower was, and she felt that was pertinent, I'm assuming.
But do you see her as trying to get a balanced view from a range of colleagues rather than just hearing from one side?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Thinking about the decant, a couple of questions here.
This is a 2A decant.
The 2A decant, yes, sorry. Do you recognise that the decision to decant the patients from Ward 2A, 2B into 6A, obviously some went to 4B, meant that for the patients who went to 6A, they were going to a ward that definitely didn't meet the ventilation standards for their patient group and were being exposed, albeit with filters, to the same water supply that they had in 2A?
So there was a lot of discussion about what was a suitable environment for them. And we knew that 6A wasn't optimal, but there really wasn't much choice to decant from 2A and 2B, and we took on board all the advice we got from infection control and so on about where we could put patients.
Thank you. Before the 2A decant,
Excuse me.
I mean, you were chief executive for, at that point, about 18 months. Are you aware whether there was a business continuity plan in place that had set out arrangements for a alternative location for the Schahalian patients should they have to move due to a crisis?
I think the business continuity plans were done more on a case of, if the electricity goes off for the whole site and so on. I don't know if there was one specifically for Schahalian, but the business continuity plans that I've been involved in have generally been the wider kind of concept.
A whole site plan?
Although I understand now that has changed now, and there are specific plans in addition to the site-wide ones.
As far as you, I mean, not completely sure, but you think there probably wasn't a Schahalian specific plan back then, but there would be now. Is that effectively your position?
I think that's what the situation is.
Okay. We discussed a number of times about how you were reacting to news about the ventilation system in 17, and you discussed on a number of occasions the importance of working how to move forward from where you were. And I've been asked to sort of probably re-ask this question. If you don't know how a deficiency or a defect has happened, how do you make sure it doesn't happen again or isn't still happening?
I guess I'm not sure I can add too much more to what I said yesterday, but I'll try. At one level, how it had come about. So we knew what the situation was, and how it had come about doesn't in itself help us to address the issue moving forward, because we knew what the situation was. And so therefore what we were trying to do was say, from where we are now, what do we need to do? Rather than say, and how did we get that? Although there was quite a lot of debate about how we got to it, but you asked me yesterday several times about why we didn't do an investigation, and I tried to answer that as best I could. But actually, our focus was really about if this is where we are, because at one level I was going to say it was clear, but it was clearer where we were, and so therefore, going back to how we got there didn't seem the most appropriate thing. The main focus for us was to try and resolve the issue.
I won't reopen the whole territory, but there was an angle that occurred to me last night, which was, how can you be sure that you knew the full extent of the deficiencies that you had to move forward from without doing an investigation? And I raise as an example the ventilation in Piku, which from my recollection of the evidence didn't really crystallize as a concern until 19, because we heard evidence from Dr. Peters and Professor Steele, how they were involved in a discussion in 19 about ventilation in Piku. And there was ultimately, I think we've got some correspondence in Health and Safety Executive about what should be done. The board acts and does various things. But that information could have been worked out 2 years before if you'd done the investigation. And so if you don't know the full extent of the problem, how can you be sure you've understood everything?
Well, we thought we did understand the situation at that time.
Now, you just answered a question about the decant to 6A, and you've explained that you took advice from a range of different personnel, including infection control, about the best options, and as you said, there really weren't an awful lot of choices. This isn't about that, it's about what was told to the patients and the parents. So, given that the DMA Canyon report had emerged in June 18, what was the reason for not telling patients of the risks from the water, given it's the same water in 6A?
So we had the local team had quite a lot of dialogue with the parents, and I don't recall exactly what was said. I don't know exactly what was said. What we were trying to do was be sensitive to the fact that it was really challenging for them, and at one level it was a separate hospital. The Royal Hospital was separate from the adult hospital, so therefore it wasn't as clear as it's being portrayed now, or as it is now, about the situation. So we were trying to look at how we could minimise any risk, and be clear with the parents. And one of the issues which has been difficult is how, when you're not certain, what do you tell people? And that's difficult, and I'm not sure if that's...
Well, I'm grateful for you raising that, because it enables me to sort of think about that. If we take water as an example, we've had some evidence that some of the parents thought there was a separate water supply for the children in the adult hospital. Now, there isn't.
Yes.
And at one level, I think we decided in the inquiry it wasn't profitable to work out how that misunderstanding came about. But given, as you say, you didn't know everything about the system, about events, is there not an obligation to be quite frank with people about what you do and don't know, so that they can fully appreciate the situation?
I think we've got to put it in the context of parents, and we were trying to be as sensitive to their needs as well. And I do understand there's been a lot of discussion about what we should have told them, what we did tell them, and so on. We were trying to reassure them that we were doing everything we possibly could to address what was an unclear situation. I mean, we didn't know that, we weren't sure what was going on, if you know what I mean. So, but what we did know is, in order to drains and wash hand basins, we were being very cautious to ensure that everything that was being advised to us by infection control was being dealt with. And that was the kind of emphasis we had at that time.
When do you think you did, as it were, know what was going on with the water and the ventilation?
think it was an iterative process, and I still think there are some questions today as to what the exact situation was.
Press the wrong button on my computer. I wonder if we can step on to the investigation into the DMA Canyon events. And it's a small thing, but I wonder if we can look at an email, a bundle 14, volume 1, page 257, which, if I've got the right page, should be step on to the next page, please. No, this is definitely the wrong page. Give me a moment just to find the right one. Take that off the screen, please. Do you recollect a change in who was to investigate the issue about the DMA Canyon reports in the few days after you found them? There was a series of different ideas about how it would be investigated.
I'm not sure what you're referring to there.
I think I'll have to come back to this because if I wander through bundle 14, volume 1, we'll use up time, and I want to use that. I'll return to that topic later.
Well, maybe just, I mean, as part of that, I had asked Mary Ann Kane as the interim director of facilities and estates, and she and I discussed bringing in, and Jim Leeper, and we talked about that, but I don't know, I don't have any recollection of a discussion other than that, unless there's something specific, which if you
No,
can find it,
I'll find it and come back to you, Scott Greg. Let's move on to Ward 2A. So I want to look at the communications around the decision to upgrade Ward 2As. Now, you touch on this on your question 56A response, which is on page 70, if I have my notes correct. So the actual question starts on 69. And then over the page, you be asked, it's not accurate to state, because the previous question contained a reference to the board statement. It's not accurate to state that ventilation within wards 2AB was identified as important during the overall upgrade process. Now, let's look at the statement, which is bundle 5, I think document 92, page 157. Yes. So this is a statement issued by the Health Board on the 6th of December 2018. Do you remember the issuing of this statement?
There was a huge amount of statements. So
I mean, bundle 5 is a big bundle, so I appreciate that. The point I want to put to you, however, and the point you put in the question, was there is a statement within it that, let's find the right paragraph. Yes, the 4th paragraph. Following this work, we have decided to upgrade the ventilation system in this area. And then it says, this will cost the amount it will cost. And then Mr. Hill is quoted. And then the background note contains the final paragraph. The drains were also tested, and then the final sentence, it was during this period that our teams identified the opportunity to upgrade the ventilation system, and this work is now being progressed. Now, what we put to you on 56A.
Sorry, which paragraph?
Question 56A, so we're going to go to the statement, page 70. Am I right in thinking you're accepting that the ventilation issues have been known by GGC before the upgrade process?
Well, we've discussed the ventilation issues yesterday,
Yeah.
so there were.
You'd accept that the fact that there was a known issue with ventilation was known before the decant?
What happened is that there was, during the decant, there was further work done because we thought we would take the opportunity just to be 100% certain about what happened in the ventilation. A report was produced, is my understanding, and at that point we decided, as the patients had already been decanted, to do the whole thing at once so that we didn't have any further.
But do you appreciate how the way the statement reads implies that the discovery there was a problem with ventilation occurred during the investigations, when in fact the discovery that there was a problem with the ventilation was known for at least a year or two beforehand?
The report that we commissioned, though, was the catalyst to do the actual.
So have you read the Innovative Design Solutions report?
I did back then, but I haven't read it recently.
Do you recollect that the author described it as, I think his words are something along the lines of, the ventilation system of this ward wasn't designed for the patient group?
Yes.
It was
Yes.
something like that?
Yes.
Yes.
It does say that, yeah.
So whilst I appreciate that his clear report might have encouraged you, do you see how families particularly might be concerned to now discover that you knew as an organisation sometime before the statement and the work that there was a problem, and yet the statement seems to imply it's all happened as a result of the works after decant?
So the organisation knew that there were some issues with some of the ventilation, but as you say, it was an iterative process in terms of getting to the granularity of that. And the ventilation itself within 2A and so on, during that time, hadn't been the real critical issue. It had been the issues with the water that crystallised that and made us move. And it's a challenge to decant patients of that with those conditions anywhere. And so therefore, we wanted to make sure that every single thing possible that had been identified at that point had been done.
Was done. Right. Why does the statement not say something along the lines of, we regret that Ward 2A was not built as we expected it to be built when we opened the new hospital? So you're very clear and upfront about what happened. Why is that not the approach taken by the health board in this sort of situation?
I don't remember the exact conversations about how it was drafted. In fact, I wasn't involved in it. I probably saw it and I think we were trying to balance the what we knew then and with what we needed to do to resolve the issues. So we weren't trying to be evasive. It was really about trying to give a message to families and patients, because we knew this was difficult for them, that we were trying to make this every single bit within that unit as optimal as it could be.
Do you see how whatever you were trying to do, it might actually look a little bit evasive once you realise that you had the knowledge for some time before?
I see why, and I've read those things a lot since I've been, and I can see why it's really a difficult balance to try and say, if you're not 100% certain about things. We found that quite difficult to be balanced in our communications approach, to make sure that we described what we knew certainly at that time, rather than give any more uncertainty to people.
Would you accept that if you had instructed the Innovative Design Solutions report on ventilation in 2A in 2017, or indeed had been instructed earlier than that, then you would have been certain earlier? But as you told us, you didn't carry out an investigation because you were looking to move forward. You see that the failure to instruct the report is what causes you not to know stuff.
The thing is that is a statement with due respect, a great deal of hindsight. We didn't know those things at that time. We didn't know what we know now. And it was an iterative kind of process that was emerging. So it wasn't a case of, there is a huge patient safety issue in 2A in 2017 and you haven't dealt. It wasn't like that. And I can see why there is a thought that might be the case now, but it really wasn't like that. It wasn't.
Ms. Freeman has told us in her latest witness statement, she's due to give evidence in 2.5 weeks, that she never received an explanation from Greater Glasgow and Clyde Health Board as to why it had taken such a long time after the hospital opened to make the required changes to the ventilation in Ward 2A. Did you ever consider giving her an explanation of why it took so long?
Mr. Freeman asked us for a lot of briefings. The Scottish Government colleagues asked for briefings, HPS asked for briefings, and we gave them, we responded to their requests for information at that time, and I don't recall exactly the detail of what was said, so I'm not sure.
So you don't recall receiving a request from either Ms. Freeman or the Scottish Government for an explanation of why it had taken so long after opening to
I don't recall that, no. I think they, like us, to be fair, and I'm sure they'll tell you themselves, but I think they were focused on moving forward and addressing the issue.
Well, I'm sure I can ask that, Ms. Freeman.
Indeed.
Let's think about Ward 4C briefly. Question 57, it's on page 71. We asked you about the decision, or we put it in the question at the top of the page. We asked you whether you were aware that ventilation 4C didn't meet the requirements for a neutropenic ward in SHTM 0301, and we asked you a series of questions.
Yep.
And your response is to report that the issue was raised by the HSE in 2019, and that this ward relates to haematology and renal transplant, which may not require specialist ventilation as it was not considered a neutropenic ward, and that you had a discussion with HSE on that issue. Now, when the board reacted to this issue in 19, was anyone looking at the original clinical output specification for this ward from 2009?
He may have been, I'm sorry.
Because the problem that I suppose is, we know now, because we've investigated, that in 2009 a clinical output specification was produced for the ward, which is bundle 16, document 15, page 1595. And this was the original haematology oncology ward before the BMT was moved in. And it was incorporated into the employer's requirements. For the
in 4C or 4B, we're talking about.
for what is now 4C,
yes,
but was going to be 4B, because if you recollect, there wasn't going to be an adult BMT unit until
Sure.
you and Ms. Armstrong took that paper. So this is, as it were, the old money 4B,
sure.
which the community of those patients are to some extent now in 4C. And if we go to page 1595, we see at the bottom of the page, see at the top of the page in the introduction, it makes a reference to advice was requested from Dr. John Hood, consultant microbiologist, regarding suitable ventilation to provide a protected environment for this patient group. And then that is set out under ventilation. And do you see how this patient group is thought necessary to have no opening windows, no chilled beams, space sealed and ventilated, positive pressure the rest of the hospital, and all highly filtered air greater than 90%, probably best HEPA, with adequate number of positive pressure sealed HEPA filtered side rooms for neutropenia patients, as at the Beast and West Scotland Cancer Centre. Now, I appreciate that this went through a number of iterations in the project, but what I want to understand is whether, when you turned to the question of what to do with 4C, did anyone look back to what was originally supposed to be there when the hospital was originally specified?
I'm afraid I can't answer that. I'm sorry, I don't know.
You received, you explained in your statement, if you go back to page 71, DDC sought further clinical opinion on this issue, which supported the view. Would that be the report from Dr. Agrawal?
Yes.
Yes. Did you know that Dr. Agrawal gave that opinion without ever visiting the hospital?
I've no idea how he came to that.
Let's take that off the screen and move to Cryptococcus. Now, you've given a lot of information on Cryptococcus.
Right. Just, Ms. Grant, if
course,
this
thank you.
is a repetition of a question you've already answered, my apologies. In your answer to question 57, you say that the patients within this ward, this is 4C, relate to hematology and renal transplant, which may not require a specialist ventilation, as it is not considered a neutropenic ward. Now, who does not consider it a neutropenic ward?
Well, at the present time, we don't consider it to be a neutropenic ward, the health board.
The health board does not.
Well, the clinical things within it.
I'm not entirely sure if I understand why we come to that conclusion. As I understand it, 4C does not deal with bone marrow transplant patients, but patients on 4C do receive a chemotherapy, and at stages within their treatment, they will be, to a greater or lesser extent, neutropenic.
Yes.
So why is it not considered a neutropenic ward?
The advice we got, and I'm not an expert in these matters of that group of patients, were that they weren't in the same category as others. And I see what Mr. McIntosh is saying about the original thing, but we were advised that that wasn't required.
Why?
I think by the clinical teams, and I'm sure there would have been input from infection control, but I can't really, I'm not trying to be difficult, I just really can't remember. But that was the advice that we got from colleagues.
Because we heard evidence from Gary Jenkins, whose responsibility had been in the management of the Beatson ward from which 4C came on, that a ward such as 4C was, in his view, a neutropenic ward.
Certainly the advice from Dr. Agrawal's report is that those patients do not need to be in that environment.
We can look at Dr. Agrawal's report, but I don't recollect, and I might be entirely wrong about that, that Dr. Agrawal gives an opinion on that. So we can check that.
We can check that, my lord. I think the thing just probably should clarify with this is that I won't take you to it, but we have various exchanges between Dr. Inkster and I think it's Dr. Hart. I'm not 100% sure about that. Who's one of the consultants in 4C. And I think she asked a series of questions. This is in this is in late 18. And she asked a series of questions about, are the patients neutropenic? And his answer is, in broad terms, some of them are all the time, or all of them are some of the time, and I can't remember which, but he gives that impression. And she produces an S-bar. Did you ever see her S-bar on board?
No,
on this
I don't
ward?
recall seeing that S-bar.
Because the point when we're talking about Ward 4C is the winter of 1819 into 19. That's when this issue was arising. And Dr. Inkster produces an S-bar as your lead infection control doctor. Did you see that?
I don't recall seeing that.
No.
I think I've said that somewhere in here.
And so there might well be other clinicians in the health board who take a contrary view to your lead infection control doctor. But at the point of the first 6 months of 19, she is advising the health board that this ward requires improved ventilation. Dr. Agrawal didn't see her S-bar either. And so I'm worried that you might not have seen all the perspectives of the clinician, your team might not have seen all the perspectives of clinicians in the hospital on this. Can you remember anything about the process that was carried out?
I'm sorry, I can't.
Let's move on to Cryptococcus, which is page 76 of your statement. Now, there's a lot of information here, and you cover it from 67, page 76, which is question 64, to 69, which is on the foot of page 77. And before we look at those answers, I wondered if you can recollect attending a meeting with Ms. Freeman in 2019 to discuss concerns about Cryptococcus in the Queen Elizabeth.
We had a lot of meetings with a reasonable number, and I couldn't tell you a specific date, but we definitely did meet with Cabinet Secretary.
Yeah, so the Cabinet Secretary, or former Cabinet Secretary now, has told the inquiry in her statement she was concerned at Greater Glasgow and Clyde's guardedness and downplaying of the situation. Were you guarded and downplay the situation?
Certainly we're not trying to be. We were trying to address the issues as they arose. And I think it would be important to understand the context was that during that period there was a huge amount of political and media attention, as well as the issues that we were trying to deal with, and the environment within which we were the situation within which we were operating was extraordinarily challenging.
Well, indeed, Ms. Freeman describes the response to GDC at this meeting about Cryptococcus as effectively, in her words, quote, nothing to see here. Would you accept that might have been how the health board's position could be interpreted by her?
I think we wanted to try and keep a balanced approach to this. We were trying to make sure that we were investigating in a proactive kind of way to see if there were any linked issues, or if this was a situation which may or may not have occurred, if there was links and so on, and whether they were linked to the environment. And because of the issues we'd had previously, there was a need to ensure that we weren't just leaping to the fact that it was the environment. We were looking to see
because of what issues that occurred earlier.
Because of all the media and the issues around the hospital previously.
So one of the ways that I don't really understand that, so I want to just explore it. So this is early 19, January, February, March sort of time, as far as you can recollect. That's when the media interest is high about Cryptococcus.
Yes.
Yes. And so you seem to be saying that because of all the media interest, you didn't want to leap to the conclusion it was the environment. Is that what you're trying to tell me?
No, I was just trying to explain to you the context within which we were operating. It was really important that, and it is in infection control, and I've dealt with a lot of infection control issues over the years, that you don't immediately leap to it's definitely this or definitely that. I mean, quite often in those situations, there are various hypotheses, and it was important that we didn't just leap to the issue, and that it was the plant room or it wasn't the plant room or whatever. We were, as a senior team, quite concerned that we need to make sure that we fully understand this, because where those patients were not really linked in the ventilation and the air handling unit process. They were not in the same place. So we were quite concerned about making sure that we weren't leaping to a conclusion that wasn't supported by the work that we were doing, and that we did the work to establish what may or may not be the most likely cause, or indeed if it was, if the cases were linked at all.
You'd accept that at the start of the work of the Cryptococcus IMT and its subgroup, one of a number of hypotheses was there was a connection to the ventilation system. You'd accept it was a hypothesis that was being investigated.
Yes, through the plant rooms and the air handling units and so on. Yeah.
The reason I raise that is because how many other possible deficiencies with the ventilation system had been brought to your attention since you arrived as chief executive by the time that one was produced as a hypothesis in the IMT?
I couldn't answer that.
Well, we can work it out. So 4B, there was a known ventilation deficiency aroused in the summer of 2015, and you eventually learnt about that in the autumn of 2017. Accept that?
Could you repeat that?
So 4B's ventilation system that caused the patients to return to the beats in the summer of 15.
Yes.
If I understand your evidence from yesterday correctly, you learnt about that at the time of the SBAR in autumn 17.
Yes.
Yes? 2A's ventilation system not being fully compliant with guidance outside the BMT isolation rooms, you learnt about that again as part of the SBAR in the autumn of 17. You'd accept that?
I'm not sure it was a specific around to.
But you definitely learnt about it when you read the Innovative Design Solutions report in late 18.
Yes.
Mr. Lambert's report is quite clear.
Yes.
Yes. You've mentioned, and I haven't pressed you on detail because I don't think you recollect the full details of learning of an evolving issue around whether isolation rooms were the right sort, and we've had evidence of them changing every few years. Another couple of isolation rooms are being changed, so that's emerged over the time you've been chief executive. That there are some isolation rooms that need to be switched to a different sort. Do you remember that?
I was less involved in that, or
Yeah.
less knowledgeable in it.
And then we have the general ward ventilation issue that you learnt about in the autumn of 17. So that's 4 potentially ventilation deficiencies or potential deficiencies. And then we add PICU, which we know Dr. Peters and Professor Steele were talking about in the late months of 18 and into 19. So that's 5 potential deficiencies. Now, if, and it's of course only a hypothesis at this stage, that the Cryptococcus cases are connected to the absence of HEPA filtration, that's a potential 6th deficiency. Now, could it be that the reason there was lots of media interest is because this was potentially the latest of a number of discovered deficiencies? And therefore, to some extent, the health board's failure to act earlier is what caused the media interest and excitement and stress in early 19.
So I don't accept all of that in the way you've portrayed it.
Okay.
It was an evolving situation. It's easy to sit here and in hindsight and think it was as clear as that. It was absolutely nowhere near as clear as that. We were trying to deal with issues that were unclear. When Professor Steele came, the chair and I met with him and asked him to do a full review of all the issues in the new hospital. And you know about that, and he's told you about that, I assume. Yes, there were issues with the ventilation, but there were a significant number of other issues as well. And it wasn't as clear as you're portraying it that, there was these issues. And that wasn't why the media, I don't think, were doing that. I think it was more a kind of just an overall issue around the infections and the history of the hospital. I don't think it was as you're portraying. Sorry.
Ms. Freeman has explained in her witness statement that she's no recollection of ever being told by Greater Glasgow and Clyde that the rooms where the 2 patients who contracted Cryptococcus in that winter, December 18, had stayed did not have HEPA filtration in the supplied air. Did you tell her of that fact, even though the cause hadn't yet been confirmed?
Our general conversations didn't go to that level of detail, so I don't think we were ever asked that. I don't recall that issue being raised. I don't remember, to be perfect.
Now, we asked you a series of questions from question 65 onwards about the work of the Cryptococcus subgroup, and I'm not going to revisit them because, as you point out, you don't feel you have the technical experience to comment on them. But what I want to just check is, were you aware that NHS and SS decided not to agree with the conclusions of the subgroup when the report was finalised?
Yes. There was a huge amount of discussion with NSS to try and address some of their concerns, the detail of which I can't recall, but there was a lot of discussion. And because this report had taken quite a long time to come, and there had
Well, it took more than 2 years to come.
It was quite. I mean, there were reasons for that, which but it did take quite a long time to come, and therefore we had to at some point bring the work to a conclusion and make a judgment as to whether it was right or wrong, but I did know that NSS weren't.
So in effect, it's really just Professor Hood's conclusion, because by the time you get to the end, NSS have gone, Mr. Hoffman's gone, there's Mr. Hood and a series of, Dr. Hood and a series of statespeople.
I wouldn't portray it as that. Professor Hood was an international expert.
Well, I'm not saying he's not of high value, but it is largely his conclusion.
I'm trying to answer your question. Professor Hood is an expert. He had, over a substantial period, engaged with colleagues. And at some point, we had to bring that work to a conclusion rather than just sitting in limbo land. So we did bring it to a conclusion. He had taken on external advice. He had also worked with people like Professor Steele to look at what the technical feasibility of some of the issues was. So he certainly wasn't a kind of lone person.
What I want to do now is to move on to what's related to Cryptococcus, but it's more contemporary. It's about the reporting of HIAs. Now, most of this will be the subject of questions for Miss Imrie, Miss Critchley, Dr. Davidson, and Professor Gardner next week. But can I ask you to look at an S-bar dated 20th November 2024, which I've been asked to put to you. And it's Bundle 52, Volume 5, page 148. So you'd accept this is a S-bar from the IPC team to you in November of last year?
Yes.
Yes. And you received this then, when you were still in post?
I presume I did. I haven't seen this recently, so
and it addresses some Cryptococcus cases that have been brought to the inquiry's attention, and the reporting of them have been the subject of evidence at the end of the Glasgow 3 hearing. Do you recollect that?
The Glasgow 3 hearing evidence?
Yes, last year.
I know.
On the next page, if we keep going through it, it's actually on page 150. There's an assessment, and it contains, there have been multiple statements recently made by the whistleblowers, our high colleagues and experts by the public inquiry, criticising NHS GGT's compliance with NIPCM and the requirements reporting infection episodes to RHI. All these opinions have been based on incomplete information, biased by people's personal beliefs and interests, trying to sensationalise the fact there is a case of Cryptococcus SP. It most likely will be found in a patient hospitalised or linked to the Queen Elizabeth. These statements have been provided without providing any evidence or facing any consequences for giving misleading information. Would you accept that these allegations are quite serious against whistleblowers, our high colleagues, and the experts of the public inquiry?
I think it reflects the infection control team's anxiety about the need for balance in the discussion.
What did you do? Because obviously the issue that's tied into this, Ms. Grant, is the extent to which NHS Greater Glasgow is, we can take that off the screen, NHS Greater Glasgow is properly in compliance with the National Infection Prevention Control Manual, not whether there is a cluster of Cryptococcus near Foreman's in the hospital. That's not the reason we raised it in evidence. And so what steps did you take once you were briefed on this to ensure that the Health Board was operating fully in compliance with the National Infection Prevention Control Manual in terms of reporting HIs?
Yeah, so I asked the Director of Nursing, who was at that point responsible for infection control, one, to consider the language within the SBAR. We had the conversation about, I'm not sure that is progressing the position as we want it, and also to engage with colleagues in HPS to try and make sure that everybody had agreed a way forward.
Yes, because that SBAR was ultimately sent to the Scottish Government by your successor.
I don't know about that.
Is that something that you would have done?
It depends. I would have asked colleagues to deal with HPS.
Right. Did you get involved in
Or
the
RHI, sorry, RHI. My
yes.
apologies.
I mean, I made that mistake as well, so I'm
Yeah, sorry.
entirely understanding. Did you, at any time between the receipt of this SBAR and your retirement, give any instruction or make any personal investigation about the SOP that's in place for reporting, deciding whether to report to RHI?
I asked them to discuss it with RHI.
You asked for it. Now, Ms. Devine has provided a recent supplementary statement, which is the Glasgow 4 Part 2 Statement Bundle, Volume 3, page 14, because, Ms. Grant, she's been providing statements around this issue of whether the SOP that GGC has in place is compliant with the manual, and there's effectively a series of statements from her and some evidence from Ms. Imrie.
In recent times, you mean?
In recent times, yes.
Okay.
And if we go to paragraph, let's see if we get the right document. There we are. Yes, if we go to page 14, I think. No, I'm not convinced this is the right place. Can we go back to the front page? Volume 3, please. Page 14. Yes. So this is a discussion about...
What is this document?
This is Ms. Devine's statement.
Oh, right. Sorry. Right, thank you.
So just to put it into context, if we can jump to the previous page, she's responding to a statement by Ms. Imrie, and at this point in the discussion, if I understand Ms. Devine's position correctly, she's referring to a national environmental pathogen surveillance pilot, paragraph 2, and making some observations about that, and that's not what I'm asking about. We go with the page onto the next page. And so paragraph 3 discusses whether the SOP aligns with the GGC policy. I'm not asking about that. It's paragraph 4. And it's a statement made at the second half of that paragraph. Additionally, conducting a HIAT assessment for all triggers, as implied by Ms. Imrie, and I think to be fair to say, Ms. Imrie doesn't think that's what she's saying, would require a multidisciplinary team meeting to review patient and clinical information, temporarily removing frontline clinical staff from their duties. This has the potential to compromise patient safety. To what extent would you, and I'm not entirely sure I know whether Mr. Devine is really saying this, to what extent would you take the view that requirements to report might undermine patient safety or compromise patient safety?
Could I just have a second to read the paragraph?
Yes, of course, please do.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
At the very highest level, do you have any concerns that imposing requirements on a health board to report HAIs or potential HAIs might compromise patient safety by distracting clinical teams from other work?
I think, and I guess Sandra would need to respond to that, but I think what that's trying to say, and I haven't seen this before, so it's the matter of if we report all of the triggers, which I think is what she's saying, then that would be a huge amount of work in addition to what we're currently doing, and therefore her view is that if you do that, then you would take clinical team out the IPCT team away from doing their work.
So you see this point as you interpret this as if there's lots of work because you have to report all the triggers.
If there's a lot of additional work, I think that's what that says. But I haven't seen that before, and I haven't spoken to Sandra about that. So, but
Thank you very much.
She is right. She is right that if you suddenly double for and make it up, but you know the amount of triggers, then you would have, and double then clearly that would have to.
Well, indeed, I'll have to put that to Miss Imrie.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't.
Well, that's
other
helpful.
than that, but I don't think it needs to be taken in the context of the other paragraphs, which I haven't had a chance to
Indeed,
read
it needs
yet.
to be the context of the pilot that precedes it, which was a particular project. Let's turn to the next section of my notes, which is the events of 2019 and Ward 6A. So on page 61 of your statement, we asked you about that's on page 61, question 45. We asked you about, this is from Ms. Grant's statement, page 61. We asked you about the decant of Ward 6A to the CDU. Now, we asked you quite a general question. What was your understanding as to why the decant was necessary? And the second sentence contains I sought further clarity on the matter as I was concerned that patients' families would be subject to additional move, which would cause them further concerns, and I want to be entirely clear why it was necessary. I also wanted to ensure the location the patients were going to was decanted was fit for purpose for these patients. Following a further discussion with colleagues, including members of the IMT, where they provided me with the necessary information, I believe the final decision related to the Ward 6A was undertaken by the IMT with input from corporate directors and local management teams. So, first bit is, I probably should have put this in the questionnaire, so I'll take this slowly. We have evidence from Dr. Inkster last year that she describes you as initially opposing the decision to move patients to CDU, but your tone changed when Dr. Inkster's recommendation received the support of Mr. Best and Dr. Armstrong, and that you might have challenged her on being risk adverse. Do you have any recollection of that?
No, I think what happened was I was quite concerned that those families had already been moved, or the patients had already been moved, and I wanted to be absolutely certain as to why we would have to move them again, because that wasn't ideal from a patient's perspective. And I think at one level, you've asked me a lot of times why I didn't do things, and in this case, I did do something, and I'm still getting, And I think there's something about. I was really concerned that there would be, because there was quite a lot of disruption for families and patients moving from 2A to 6A originally. And to have another move really was not great. And we'd also put quite a lot of effort because families had raised, and rightly so, that, they didn't have a playroom and a kitchen and a place for a kind of a restroom or something like that. I don't think that's the terminology, but you know what I mean, for families to sit in. And so we'd put those in place, and therefore we didn't want to go back to a situation where they were in an area which didn't have the facilities that they had been very clear that they needed. And so it wasn't my reluctance to do it. When IMTs have made recommendations, the vast majority of the time you would implement them if they're possible to do. And so, but I think it's right that in this state, I wanted to clarify what was happening, and it was a genuine concern that families would be disrupted again, and I wanted to be sure and clear about why that was so. So it wasn't a matter of, I can't remember the words you said, opposing or something like that.
Yeah, the words that come from Dr. Inkster is opposing, and you suggesting to her that she's risk averse.
So I don't recall doing either, but I certainly was asking questions about why we were doing this. But it was for a genuine reason to make sure we were absolutely clear about why we were disrupting patients again.
Now, I'd also need to press you on that final, it's not quite a sentence, but the final sentence of that answer about the topic of who actually would have made the decision to decant to CDU.
I think in this case, well, I've tried to describe it. I think the IM&T, I can't remember, to be perfectly honest, if their recommendation was to move to CDU. I can't remember if it was a specific that or it was just to move out.
I think the evidence is it was specific.
Right, I don't recall that, but and so therefore they made it quite similar to 2A actually. They made the recommendation. There was that discussion that you've just described or we've just described, and there were other corporate directors involved in that. And I think then we collectively agreed that it would have to happen.
I want to move on to question 46, which is the closure of Ward 6A to new admissions at the start of August 2019. And then patients are diverted to other centres and some sent further afield. And it's not immediately clear from the minutes of the IMT the exact timing and the choreography of this decision. And given some of the evidence we've had, what I was trying to understand by asking you this question is who ultimately decided, it may not be one person, it may be a group of people, to close 6A to new admissions at the start of August. And the first sentence, you describe concerns being raised, so that's helpful. And then you've explained that clinical decisions relating to individual patients are taken by local clinical teams. And again, I understand that. So if we go on to the next page, and then you're told there's a recommendation to close 6A. That's what you've said in the answer to 6A. But ultimately, who made the decision? Is it like the decant of 2A, where there was an IMT recommendation, it went to a group of senior people who appear to have decided to accept the recommendation? Or is it like the CDU closure, where the IMT recommended and there is some form of ad hoc discussion and a group of people decide to go with the decant? Or is it like an example you've previously given me where the IMT just decide because it's a matter that you're comfortable them dealing with? Where's the decision actually made? Because we can't find a minute or a record, you see.
I think it's similar to that which I've described previously in terms of there being a discussion at IMT, and then this one is slightly different. I'll come back to that in a second. And then that being raised with corporate directors and myself to make sure that all angles had been covered. And then collectively we made, so I didn't sit in my room and say on a Tuesday afternoon, right, I'm closing this ward.
No.
There was discussion, and that's how it should be. It should not be the chief exec in isolation, or anyone else for that matter, sits and does that. And that generally isn't how it happened, and I don't think this is how it happened there. But this one was slightly different because it involved having to send patients away to other boards and so on. And so therefore it was right that we had a discussion, a senior level, about how we were going to engage with like Edinburgh and so on, and what that would mean and whether they had the capacity to take these patients and so on. So there was an added dimension to this that hadn't been there previously.
So if we were to take from that A, the recommendation comes from the IMT and the clinicians, but B, because it has impacts outside the health board, you and senior colleagues would have been involved in that decision and would have been making steps that it could work before the decision is made. Is that roughly right?
I'm really not entirely sure whether we decided that it had to close and then we made, or it was all part of the same thing. I'm not entirely sure.
Certainly,
it's around the same time.
You and the rest of the corporate management team, Dr. Armstrong, estates, these people, you would have been involved in making the decision. It's not a decision solely for the IMT in this case.
I don't think so. No, I think we were involved.
Now, I want to turn, I'm not sure I need to take you to a document, but I can if I wish to, if necessary, which is the decision to remove Dr. Inkster as the chair of the IMT. Now, you deal with that in answer to our question 48 on page 64. And you've given quite a long answer. And what I'm going to do in order to sort of speed things up is I've read the answer. And I want to just check I've got the choreography first right in the order, in that you hear from the medical director and she tells you certain things, which is what the 2 paragraphs have there.
Yes.
And so is it your position that you're not actually involved in the decision or just being told it's happening?
Being told what's happening.
That Dr. Inkster there's going to be a discussion and then you're told she's removed. You're not actually involved in making the decision. It's Dr. Armstrong reporting it to you, effectively.
What I recall happened was there was a discussion where colleagues made Dr. Armstrong aware that...
Which colleagues would this be?
I think, people who had attended the IMT. So
was the discussion something you were involved in or it's being reported to you by Dr. Armstrong?
No, I was just trying to tell you.
Sorry.
So Dr. Armstrong had, I think, several people come to her. You'd have to ask her about the exact thing. And at the same time, I do recall one evening in the board headquarters that a colleague, one of the directors who'd been at the meeting, indicated that he was concerned about the style and tone of the discussions at the M&T. And it was around the same time. And then Jennifer, Dr. Armstrong, told me that she was going to pull together a meeting to look at what needed to be done, because it was quite serious that we had been sitting with an IMT running for some substantial amount of time. And if the functioning of it wasn't appropriate, then we wanted to make sure that it was dealt with.
So firstly, in order to see if we can connect that to existing evidence, would that director be Professor Steele?
No, I think it was Kevin Hill.
Kevin Hill, right.
I think so.
Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Kevin Hill, I think you said.
Kevin Hill.
Just on this idea that the IMT had been running for a long time.
For some time, I said, I think.
Yes, so we have a bundle 1, in which we've put all the IMT's minutes in. And this IMT starts on the 19th of June of 19.
Yes.
So why do you say it's a long-running IMT? Because we're only on the middle of August now.
Well, 2 months is...
You feel that's long?
I said sometime, I didn't say long time, and if I did then...
Yeah, no, you're right there. But... And I recognise I'm coming in this, A, with the benefit of hindsight, and B, from outside. Looking back through our bundle 1 of all the IMTs that are related to the hospital, the water incident, there are some quite long IMTs going on. Would you accept that?
Yes.
Right. So the next question is, obviously Dr. Armstrong arranges her meeting. We asked you on page 65 whether there was any discussion, top of the page, of whether the views of Professor Gibson and the clinical team in Ward 6A should be sought. I'm not sure you've answered the question.
I don't know. My understanding is that the discussion is on I do not know if there was any discussion with the views of the clinical team being sought.
Right, because...
That's me trying to answer the question.
If we go back to something you said about the time when we were talking about the stage 2 whistleblower, it's important to get a balanced view from a range of colleagues rather than just one side. How would you respond to the suggestion that this process, and I recognise it's a process, might be criticised because A, Professor Gibson and her colleagues weren't consulted, and B, Dr. Inkster wasn't present at the meeting on the 20th of August, 2019.
So the responsibility for making sure the IMT is functioning properly is that of the IMT chair. And so it wasn't really to do with the content of the IMT, it was more about the process of making sure it was working properly. And so I'm assuming that that's why the clinical team were not involved in that discussion. In terms of the...
But they were at the IMT, Scrap.
But so were a lot of other people.
Indeed. So it's worth, I think, to cut it quickly, let's put the core point. If you look at who was present, it's Mr. Hill, Professor Steele, Dr. Kennedy, Dr. Armstrong, a group of people, most of whom were at the IMT, but not all. But the people who are conspicuous by their absence are the clinical team and Dr. Inkster. I'm just wondering whether there is anything of concern about the fact that this meeting took place and only heard from one part or two parts of the group of people at IMT.
I think there's two different issues there. I think the clinical team being involved, I see why that is so. I don't know if they need to be involved in that kind of conversation about how it's functioning, right? I think the presence or otherwise of Dr. Inkster, I mean, she was invited to the meeting as I understand it. I wasn't at the meeting. I was told there was going to be a meeting to discuss how to progress. She was invited to the meeting, and I think you've heard from colleagues that she was unable to attend on that day. And therefore, it was the intention that she was involved in that discussion.
Thank you. I wonder if I can just check something which may be inadvertent on your part. In the answer to question B,
I didn't understand this question, actually.
yes, so that's why it may be inadvertent.
I didn't understand it.
So if we're thinking at the period before the 23rd of August 2019, who was giving you advice on the different hypotheses that needed to be considered by the IMT? What was your source of advice on infection control issues, effectively?
So is this when Dr. Inkster was still in the chair?
Yes, up until the point he's removed. Who's giving you advice on infection control issues arising out of the gram-negative bacteriemia?
So the medical director was giving me an update on what was happening.
Yes, and you've got no other source other than her?
No.
No, thank you. Right, let's step on and look at question 49, which is the bottom of this page.
Sorry, just to go back to
Yes,
that.
of course.
I mean, there may have been some discussions with Tom Steele and Kevin Hill and so on.
Yeah, but they've not got infection control expertise.
Yes, but just to say, it wasn't all Dr. Armstrong, probably there was general discussion.
But what I want to check is you're not hearing from another microbiologist in the hospital giving you advice about infection control issues?
No,
right. Question 49 deals with when you first became aware that Dr. Inkster resigned as lead ICD. Now, of course, we didn't give you a date about that, and so you answered initially at the bottom of the page about her first resignation in January 2018. And then over the page, on page 66, you would talk about her subsequent resignation in September 19, which is what I meant to ask you about.
Okay.
The medical director informed me that Dr. Inkster had resigned. I discussed the position with her and indicated she was considering the issues raised in Dr. Inkster's letter to her, including workload, personal issues, and a range of other matters that I cannot recall.
Yeah.
Now, did you see Dr. Inkster's resignation letter at the time?
I've certainly seen it, but I'm not, probably, is it? Yes, I think so.
You think so? What do you think? What did you think at the time was Dr. Inkster's reasons for resigning?
I say I can't recall exactly what all the issues were, but there was a range of things I think about, as I vaguely recall this, that she had, there was too much work for her to do. She'd had a period of illness, and I think she was anxious, thoughtful about that, and that she hadn't, I think there's something about she hadn't been invited to go to a visit or something like that, and that people, I can't remember the exact thing, but she wasn't particularly happy with the information she was getting and some of the issues that were around the functioning of IMTs and stuff like that. I genuinely can't remember the exact detail.
Let's look at the letter. It's bundle 14. It's an email, bundle 14, volume 2, document 151, page 579. Now, I think it's fair to say that Dr. Inkster has graciously allowed us to not redact the sections of this letter that relate to her health, and that makes help for clarity. But if we look at the fourth paragraph, what do you think is her primary reason for going based on this letter?
I think it's all of those things. It's a combination of things. That's
But
what I took from it.
the reason I mention this is you haven't mentioned in either your statement or what you've just described what she says in the sort of first substantive section, that she's experienced undermining, a lack of respect, and has felt unsupported and undervalued of members of my infection control team and management. Now, I'm wondering why, when you provide your written answer to our questions and when you just then explain what you thought the main issues were, that bit doesn't stand out. I mean, it doesn't get mentioned by you.
No, I did try to answer that just a second ago in terms of saying she wasn't particularly happy, and I've recalled that Great Ormond Street visit. She wasn't particularly happy with the way things were operating, as I put it to you a minute ago. So I wasn't specific, you're right. But I didn't recall the detail of a paragraph in a letter, you know, a few years ago. But it was about the way things were operating and how she wasn't fully supported. Yeah. But I don't.
Do you think she has any validity in the issues she raises?
I'm not close enough to that, and I know that Dr. Armstrong did ask colleagues to look into the reasons why she was.
Indeed, that was Dr. Deegan's review,
Yes.
which we've heard about from him, so I won't revisit that with you. Do you think the resignation of Dr. Inkster as lead ICD could have been avoided? But we can take that off the screen if that would.
I don't know the answer to that, actually. I think one of the catalysts was, you know, the change to the chair of the IMT. And I think that was difficult. And I think she considered that she hadn't been appropriately involved in that decision. And I'm not sure if there was appropriate communication with her around that. So I do think that that's something that we should reflect on. But the functioning of the IMT was so serious. I mean, the issues were so serious for the board in terms of these patients having to be sent away with all the inherent risks of that and a few other things, that it was really, really important that that IMT was functioning properly and that it didn't get distracted by the wrong thing, shall we put it like that, and that they were absolutely focused on the things they had to. So this was a really serious issue for patients, which was the overriding concern of those involved in those discussions about how do we make sure the IMT is functioning properly, because it has to, because those patients are in a suboptimal position, shall we say, about having to be treated elsewhere, and that was not something that we were comfortable with at a senior level at all, because we were really concerned about the patients and their families.
I do know that this question uses hindsight. So we obviously have the original resignation letter from Dr. Inkster in 2015, when she attempts to demit her sessions as this regional sector ICD. And of course, subsequently, she was appointed as lead ICD. Mm. And one gets the impression from talking to both her and Dr. Armstrong that at times relations between the two of them were good.
Yep.
But is there not an echo, a connection between what she's saying in that letter about not feeling supported and the issues that she was raising 4 years before? And I'm wondering, have you got any thoughts or observations about whether the infection control team as a whole was operating effectively in the Queen Elizabeth in the years after it opened?
So there's a couple of things there. I think the senior players within the infection control team were managing infection control across the board area, and we really didn't have the same amount of challenge in other parts of the domain. We did not. Even although there were some serious issues, you know, IMTs arose and infection things arose in other parts of our domain. The Royal Infirmary is a huge site. It's not, you know, it's not quite as big as the Queen Elizabeth, but it is huge. And we didn't have the same kind of issues and challenges around working relationships there.
So before Dr. Inkster...
I wonder...
Sorry.
And the other thing is, one of the key themes in this, it is really important that all colleagues, including Dr. Inkster, but not exclusively, it's everybody, has to work in an environment where there is respect and due weight given to all sorts of people's views, whether it's the Estates Department, whether it's the local managers, whether it's the clinicians, whether it's infection control, whether it's Dr. Inkster, and that has proven to be quite difficult. It isn't about Jane Grant as the chief exec deciding that this is what, I mean, my job is to ensure that I have tried to empower the staff and colleagues to do what they need to do, and support them where they need that, challenge them where they need to be challenged, but to actually hear what they say as well. And that has been a challenge within that whole infection control situation in the South sector. And it has been difficult to get that team ethos, which is an absolute requirement for everybody, including through the GMC, which asks everyone to be a team player.
The reason I tried to cut in, I probably shouldn't have done, was what were the issues in the South sector that Dr. Inkster was causing before you get to August 19? Because you said there were issues in the South sector in the Queen Elizabeth that weren't anywhere else. What was Dr. Inkster doing outside the Queen Elizabeth?
I didn't say that. I said there were you said that the relation. Sorry, you indicated that the relationships in 2015 and so on and so on. There were a lot more issues in terms of interactions and style and tone of operation, shall we say, in the South sector. I never said they were Dr. Inkster, nor did I.
Well, indeed, that's the point, because
some of them were around how the infection control team operated in terms of her role as the ICD and so on, but there was others as well.
Well, I suppose there's a couple of different possibilities there, and I want to explore them with you. So one option, which is that there were people in the South sector whose way of doing business in some way caused disruption. That's one option. The other option is there were issues in the South sector which, in some ways, the addressing of caused disruption. Do you see that? Are there any other issues that might have been causing these problems in the South sector that you're talking about?
So there's a difference between the issues and the method of and the way people are working, if I could call it that. You know, there were undoubtedly a lot of issues, as in things happening that required attention. But when that occurs, it's even more important that the true team working is embedded in the way we work. And that's what I'm trying to say, is that was quite clunky on some occasions.
How do you respond to the suggestion that the way that the September-October 2017 SBAR, stage 1 whistleblow, was dealt with and its stage 2 consequence is separate from the issues that arose about Dr. Inkster's chair of the ICD, because she wasn't a whistleblower. Mm. Dr. Inkster's not a whistleblower, technically. So, at this point, are these two issues connected in your mind or separate?
I'm not sure I understand the question. So the September, I'll try and answer it, and if I don't, then please correct me. The SBAR in 2017 was a genuine, and I would say that we didn't realise it was a stage 1 whistleblowing. You call it whistleblowing, but we thought it was just.
No, I understand that.
Right. That was a genuine attempt to make sure, because in a large organisation, and I've been there many times, people say things and but it doesn't actually ever come to a crisp. These are the things we need to do. You just complain that it's not done, or I just say it's done and it's not done, and it all gets into a mess. So that was a genuine attempt to say, right, let's try and get onto one bit of paper the things that are concerning people. And as part of that, but that I don't think, and it may, in terms of your question, is quite a challenging one. And some of that may have been about how things had been communicated or whatever. So in that regard, it might be connected to what happened in 2019, but I don't think there's a direct correlate. It's quite a...
I'm grateful for that, because I'm worried that I'm using hindsight in an unhelpful way. So let me just put some thoughts out there and see how you respond. So there seems potentially to be a view in the parts of the infection control management and other parts of clinical management, including Dr. Armstrong, that there is something problematic about the way that Dr. Peters, Dr. Redding, and others raised that stage 1 SBAR, and then Dr. Redding took it on to stage 2. Now, we've had lots of evidence about whether there's any value in that statement, but that seems to be sort of cloud of unhappiness around that process. And there seems to be a separate, potentially, area of concern, a cloud of unhappiness that emerges in the early part of 19 in the relationship between Dr. Inkster and others, including Professor Steele and Dr. Armstrong, that in some ways reaches a peak in her resignation. Now, what I'm wondering to understand is, to what extent, if these are these two separate things going on in the Queen Elizabeth, in the Health Board, or are they linked in your mind? Are the whistleblowers and the way they behave and the way they're addressed and what they raise, is that linked to what Dr. Inkster is doing in 19, or are they separate?
Well, they're part of the overall context within the within the Queen Elizabeth. So, in a loose way, they may be connected. But I think there are common themes. Some of the people that you've described there are actually responsible for delivering some of these. I mean, Dr. Peters was the lead clinician and so on. So
Indeed.
she was responsible for dealing with some of this stuff. So there is a kind of but not all of it in terms of there's things that so there's I don't really know how to answer that question, because without meaning to be difficult, I think that I personally think that putting things down on a bit of paper to stop the kind of toing and froing of who's done it and who's not done it and whatever is a reasonable way to address that. I think yesterday we talked about on that SBAR all sorts of things, some of real significance and some, frankly, I'm not entirely sure what they are. But that aside, there was a structured process to try and address those issues, and I think that's right. As part of that, the team dynamics, I'm sure, was part of some of that. So in that sense, and at that point, Dr. Inkster was responsible for delivering some of this, and again, not all of it. So the dynamics are slightly different, but they're not in that whole in context of the Queen Elizabeth and some of the challenges. They are that kind of team dynamic communications theme might be part of it.
Because I suppose it might be suggested, I not actually think this is my current thought, but just as a possibility, that one of the reasons that it might be said that one of the reasons Dr. Inkster eventually is removed as the lead ICD is because she is perceived to be part of a problem that has its roots in the 2017 October SBAR and that whistleblower.
I don't think that's correct.
You don't think that's correct?
No.
No. Why would you say that?
Because it was, I don't think someone, I'm not quite sure what you're saying there, but I don't think someone said, right, that 2017 things is just continued till 2019 and therefore we need to remove to these. I don't think that ever happened.
Well, look, this might actually be quite a good point to break for the morning coffee break.
Very well. We'll take our coffee break. Ms. Granton, try and be back just about 12:45.
Thank you.
Ms. McIntosh.
Thank you, my lord. Mr. Grant, I wonder if we can move on to the topic of communications with Professor Cudahy in the summer and autumn of 2019. In order to do that, let's get your letter up first. So this is the letter of the 27th of September 2019. So that's bundle 6, document 23, page 75. Document 24, sorry, but it's this page. So this is a letter you wrote to Professor Cudahy about his daughter's infection. And obviously this is September. And if we can just, as it were, start the story at the first of the IMT when this issue comes up, which is on the 3rd of June 2000. In fact, we go back further than that. When did you first get involved in the question of what communications should be given to Professor Cudahy around his daughter's infection?
I can't quite remember the chronology, but I think the chair was contacted by him, I think.
Let's try and sort of piece it together. So
Yeah.
there's an email which is of the 19th of June 2019. It's in bundle 8, page 67. And so this is an email thread that, if we look at low down the page, we see this starts off with an email from Dr. Inkster. If we go over the page, we can see some actual details from Dr. Inkster, and we see it sent to Dr. Armstrong and a number of colleagues. If we go on to back to 67, we see that at the top of the thread is an email from Mark Dell.
Yeah.
Who was Mark Dell?
He was in the comms office.
Yeah. And he states on the 19th of June, he just spoke with Kevin. I take that's Kevin Hill. He's letting Jane and Jonathan know. I'm assuming Jane is you and Jonathan's Mr. Best.
Yes, I'm assuming so, yes.
Do you think it's possible that you could have known about this issue as early as it were as 19th of June?
About Professor Cudahy?
And his daughter's infection and the Mycobacterium chelonae that had been found and the second case?
I think it's more likely that it was part of the overall situation. I'm not sure it would have been identified as being, because if you look at the, sorry, if we could go back.
Go back to page 68. Yeah, there's no names in the email, obviously.
Yeah. So it's quite important as well that,
because the redaction is actually a location; it's not a name.
But quite frequently, the generality of what was going on would have been discussed rather than the details of an individual
That's
person.
what I wondered. And so, at this point, would it be your position that you're being told of what's going on, but there's no names attached to it?
I think that's most likely, but I couldn't categorically say that it wasn't. But we generally tried to avoid, at my level, talking about individual patient names and stuff.
And then if we look at the IMT from the 3rd of July, which is bundle 1, document 74, page 330. And if we go on to page 322, not at all, 332, thank you. And we see this discussion of a hypothesis at the very bottom of the page. The hypothesis might be that it's due to patients and staff having access to unfiltered water in throughout different areas of the hospital. The reason I've shown you that is because we then have Mr. Redfern's evidence in the Glasgow 2 hearing. Now that's just for my colleague's benefit, columns 183 to 185 of his transcript, where he seems to understand that the threshold for the engagement of the organisational duty of candour had been reached at this point in early July 2019. And I just wondered if you can recollect when there was first discussion at your level of whether the organisational duty of candour had effectively been triggered for the Mycobacterium chelonae cases.
It wasn't dealt with by me, and that sounds again evasive, and I don't mean it to be, but I think there would have been discussions that, well, there was discussions, I understand, through the process, but I wasn't involved in those discussions.
So at this stage, you wouldn't have been involved in determining what was told to the families, and that you'd see that being dealt with within the teams.
At the risk of repeating what I said yesterday, we're sitting in an organisation with 41,000 staff and £4.5 billion budget, and that's not to evade my responsibilities in the slightest bit, but it's just the detail of those things has to be dealt with by other people.
Yes, and so what I'm trying to do is to work out between at this point, that seems an entirely sensible position to be in, but by the time we get to 27th September, you've clearly carried out some form of, I hesitate to use the word investigation, but you've got involved in the issue because you've written the letter to Professor Cudahy.
Yes.
And I'm trying to wonder, when do you think you might have effectively been thinking about A, Mycobacterium chelonae, B, the Cudahy family, and C, what do we say to him? Because the next stage in this communication story is a letter by the chair on the 4th of July, which is bundle 6, document 18, page 53. I hope so. Yes. So that's by the chair.
Yes.
And I just wondered whether at this point you're involved or whether the chair is effectively dealing with this independently of you.
No, I was involved at that.
Yeah, so you the chair, you wouldn't get the chair involved without you being involved, is what seems a reasonable
Well, in
inference.
something like that, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you help us about whether the chair was being asked to tell Professor Cudahy about the existence of a second case? Because he doesn't do that in this letter.
He wouldn't have been involved in that either.
But if we look at... Sorry, carry on.
I think, and I'd need to go and check this, but I'm sure you know, but I think Professor Cudahy contacted one of the board members, if I recall correctly, and the board member contacted the chair. I think that's... and so that's how the original thing at our level started, I think.
Would you have been aware... Well, let's find the report in the IMT minutes. Would you have been aware of either Mr. Hill or Mr. Redfern or anybody like that reporting to the IMT that the chair would report this to Professor Cudahy?
The detail of the second
What the detail, the existence of a second case?
I don't think that would be the chair's job to do that.
So if for example, people think it was the chair's job to do, you wouldn't see that as his job?
No. I don't think that would be. Because he wouldn't be able to, if there was going to be a discussion with Professor Cudahy or whoever, then it would have to be with people who could answer the detail of the question. There was a couple of meetings, I think, and I've forgotten the exact date, but the chair and I did certainly, with Professor, with Dr. Armstrong, met with Professor Cudahy. And then there was another meeting arranged, as I recall, with Dr. Davidson, Jonathan Best, and I think Professor Leonard, I think, to discuss things with Professor Cudahy, I think.
Because what seems to be the case is that is that the professor wasn't very impressed, to put it mildly, that he learnt about the second case from the family of the second case, not from the health
I've
board.
seen his. I saw in the bundle you'd sent me was the email that he sent
Yes.
to Jamie, and then he wrote to me about that.
And then you wrote your reply, which is this bundle document 75, page 75. Did you understand that was part of his concern at the time?
About he hadn't been communicated properly in the
Yes.
second case.
Yes.
Yes, clearly I did.
Yes. And you've given an apology
Yep.
of a sort at the bottom of the page, but can you explain why it was that this, I use the term loosely, failure to tell him this information occurred?
I can't recall the detail, but there was some email correspondence about that. I think about there being confusion about who was going to tell him, when they were going to tell him, and annual leave and stuff like that. So there was a delay, I think, in telling him.
Because we've had evidence from Mr. Hill in the last week that he told Mr. Redfern not to talk to Professor Cudahy about the second patient's condition so as to not breach confidentiality.
Yeah.
Is that something you found out when you were preparing to write this letter?
That Kevin Hill told.
Kevin Hill effectively put a block on Mr. Redfern telling the professor.
I think there was a genuine attempt. I think when I've looked, and some of this is it is in hindsight and looking at the correspondence rather than my absolute recollection. So it was only some of this that I was involved in. Was that there had been some communication blips already with Professor Cudahy, and they were trying to make sure that there was a clear route of communication. I think that's what that was about, rather than trying to. But it wouldn't be for the chair to get involved in. His role would be a much higher level discussion.
Yes, but if the chair's going to write a letter,
Yes.
and if Professor Cudahy thinks he has an undertaking to be told about the second case,
Yes.
then presumably someone would have to tell the chair to mention the second case, because the chair wouldn't know about it otherwise. And what I'm trying to work out is there someone in charge of this communication process, or is it, to some extent, an inadvertence of multiple people doing things?
So normally the chair and myself wouldn't be involved in those kind of discussions.
Yes.
I mean, they would be. And so therefore, it wasn't entirely routine to do things in this way. But Professor Cuddy had asked to be, or had made contact through that. I think it was through that route that I've described to you. And so therefore, the routine processes and this other process were going along at the same time, or maybe not exactly the same time, but if you know what I mean. And so therefore, that wasn't all that normal to do that.
But you knew when you wrote this letter that one of his concerns, and I accept he has many, was that he'd not been told about the second case.
I think so, yes.
And you say in the third paragraph, second line, I understand your frustration regarding our communication with you and Molly about a second child bacteria. I've now reviewed the position described from the outset. I would like to assure you that there was no willful intent in withholding any information. Now, Mr. Hill has given evidence that he actually actively told Mr. Redfern not to him for a reason to do with patient confidentiality.
Uh-huh.
But you don't report that. Is there a reason why you're not reporting that?
Sorry, I'm getting a bit confused here. Could you repeat the question?
So look at the question here, the paragraph here. You say,
I note your concern, that paragraph.
Get back. I understand your frustration, and then I have now reviewed the position in this regard. From the outset, I would like to assure you there was no willful intent in withholding any information. Now, we could have a debate about what willful means, but Mr. Hill's position is that he absolutely, deliberately, on the basis of patient confidentiality, told Mr. Redfern not to tell Professor Cudahy about the second case. Now, one can debate whether Mr. Hill was right or wrong to do that, but I am wondering why this isn't reported to the professor at this point as part of a transparent, open communication.
You're wondering why Kevin Hill?
No, I'm wondering why you didn't tell him about Kevin Hill. Maybe you didn't know, but I'm wondering why.
I doubt I knew. I doubt I knew that.
Right. Did you work out why it was he wasn't told? I know you haven't said it here, but did you work it out?
I don't remember. I'm sorry. I just really don't remember. But we were, the chair and I were concerned about Professor Cudahy's concerns, if you know what I mean. We weren't taking them anything other than extremely seriously. And I would like to pay tribute to Molly Cudahy. She was a remarkable young lady. But we were not taking this anything other than 100% seriously. So it wasn't a case of we were trying to listen to his concerns and trying to address them. So, but his concerns over here, we had to rely on the teams to actually give us the information, because we didn't know quite a lot of the detailed things that he was asking.
I understand that, but I mean, is there not a risk that if you acknowledge his concerns, you apologize for not telling him effectively, and you tell him there's no willful intent, and yet we now discover that one of your colleagues, for a reason that is certainly not necessarily wrong, but certainly justified in one sense, has actually told Mr. Redfern not to tell him? Do you see how he might feel that you're not being entirely transparent with him?
I think it's getting a bit convoluted here, though, because I don't remember exactly who told what to who and who said that. And I understand that if Kevin has said that, then he said that. But I think the minute of the IMT suggests, or some meeting suggests, that he will be told. So there must have been some debate about whether he was to be told about the second case or not. I don't know the answer to that.
I mean, yes, it's entirely possible the IMT might think he should be told and Mr. Hill thought he shouldn't. And there's an interesting question about who ultimately gets to decide. But you don't seem to have discovered that or reported it to the professor.
I think that last sentence, I think, indicates we weren't trying to be anything other than transparent. But there were issues about why he was not told. I'm not sure what the reason for that was, to be honest. Whether it was just the confidentiality issue, which was an issue, and has been an issue throughout all of this, where there have been a lot of it's really quite important that patients' confidentiality is respected, and there's been quite a lot, and even in some of the discussions we've had, some of the patients, it's not normal to at all to discuss patients in the public domain. It's not.
No, it's not, and I should make it clear that I got the consent of the professor and indeed
I wasn't
to talk about this case.
I wasn't referring that to you, and so therefore there has been a lot of attention paid to not identifying patients, and so when I think that's a genuine sentiment, and I think the other thing is whether that was that or whether there was a communication blip and people were away. It could be either.
Let's move on to the escalation to stage 4 of the escalation framework. That 22nd November 2019. I'd like to explore your answer to question 70. It's on page 78 of your statement bundle. Now, what was your feeling at the time about the decision to escalate TGC to stage 4?
What did I feel about it? I was clearly anxious that the board was escalated to stage 4. I was concerned about the fact that the Scottish Government felt that we weren't dealing with things in the way they would want. And we were, and importantly, the impact of that on patients and families and our staff. And however, thought that the process would bring with it some additional external scrutiny. Although throughout this, I would emphasise throughout these whole episodes, we were actively seeking external support and advice, which was difficult to get because some of it wasn't. Some of the issues that we were dealing with were highly complex, and therefore people hadn't experienced them before, so it's quite difficult. But so we were open to having any further external support that we could get, and if there was a other experience or new advice or whatever to try and deal with that. So we did think that would help.
Do you think it was justified to take you to stage 4?
I don't think it's for me to say that, frankly. It was difficult. We were concerned, but I do understand why the Scottish Government did that.
I mean, I think I should press you. I mean, you're the chief executive of the organisation that's been taken to stage 4, or what Mr. Wright says in his statement for his reasons. Or even if we really wanted to, go and look at the official record of the Parliament, the statement by the Minister at the time. But you've said in your statement that it was quite intrusive, quite a lot of extra work. Do you think that the reasons given in the minister's in Mr. Wright's letter as DG justified going to stage 4? We can look at them. It's Bundle 52, Volume 1, Document 23, page 310. So he sort of explained, in light of the ongoing issues around the systems, processes and governance in relation to infection prevention, management control, Queen Elizabeth, RHC, and the associated communication and public engagement issues, I've concluded that further action necessary to support the board to ensure appropriate governance is in place to increase public confidence in matters, and therefore this specific issue, the board will be escalated to stage 4 of our performance framework. This stage is defined as significant risk to delivery, quality, financial performance, or safety, senior level transformational support required. Now, is he wrong?
I think we still felt that we could get through this. However, I do understand why he thought that it was taking longer than it should, and that he wanted to have an external overview of it. I do understand why.
In your answer to question 71, which is page 79, we ask you, what is your view on the effectiveness of the escalation process? And you start off by saying the escalation process brought an enormous amount of additional work, in addition to the very significant additional work being undertaken locally to address the issues. Now, inside this answer, and I recognise it's a long answer and should be read as a whole, you say that the volume of papers and presentations and a number of other things, and you can see that line that begins about 6 lines up, 7 lines up. This was detrimental to the overall running of GGC. And then you talk about the overwhelming pressure to the senior team.
Yep.
So in that sense, if as I well understand, that creates much more work, was the additional workload on the senior team something that was justified for the outcome that came from escalation? Did you benefit enough to justify the hard work?
I think it needs to be considered in the overall context. So we were already still dealing with difficult issues in terms of the things we've been discussing and the other things that you get in a board of the size of NHS GGC. We had that escalation that you're referring to. We then had a subsequent escalation in, I think it was January 2020. And at that point, we were also at the beginning of COVID. So the work that we were trying to do, what we had to do, was to try and continue to deal with the issues that were there, to deal with the oversight board and the requests of that from the infection control escalation, if we could call it that. And then, in addition to that, we had the escalation of the performance issues that are described somewhere else. And then we had COVID. And the combination of that was really quite challenging. It was very, very difficult.
But what I'm trying to say is I appreciate it was challenging, and I can actually well understand the amount of paperwork we've reviewed. Someone had to write it all, and I get that. But did it produce a benefit that justified the work from your perspective?
I think things could have been a little bit more streamlined. I think they could have been. I think there was a huge amount of papers and presentations and things, and I think that at times there wasn't a kind of appreciation that of those blocks that I've described to you, and there's some of the parts of that, and so the Oversight Board did produce, and I think at all times Greater Glasgow and Clyde has been receptive, despite what everybody said, to if there are additional things that we need to do and recommendations that have been that people believe, those external colleagues believe would benefit patients going forward, then it's absolutely incumbent on us to do that. So within the Oversight Board and so on, there are recommendations and things like that that we should address. But I think I'm not sure there's a simple answer to your question. Was the cost benefit analysis or whatever? I'm not sure there's a simple answer to that. I'm sorry, but
so Ms. Freeman states in her statement that when the board was escalated to stage 4, she felt the board thought they were being unfairly dealt with.
Mm.
Did you feel the board was being unfairly dealt with?
I think that there was I think we thought that there had been an enormous amount of work done by us prior to this. We had tried to take on board external advice from HPS and so on, and we had sought input from through them and also through our own efforts, external expertise, to make sure we were dealing with the things that because we didn't have some of these issues were incredibly challenging. So I think we felt that we had been involved with HPS and with other experts through HPS and with the Scottish Government, and so therefore it was a bit disappointing that we were escalated.
She also explains in her statement that she saw no change in the board's attitude when the Oversight Board was put in place. It actually made it challenging to support the board because the board, and I said, this is not her words, in the sense the board wasn't changing its way it's behaved once it's been put into stage 4.
I'm not sure I would agree with that. I think we did everything we could to support the work of the Oversight Board. Fiona McQueen, who chaired the board, I think has acknowledged through the Oversight Board report the amount of work that Glasgow and Clyde did themselves, but also to support the Oversight Board. So I'm not sure that is correct. We certainly recognised their role and worked hard to support the input that they required.
How do you respond to those who suggest that escalation should have actually come earlier than it did, perhaps in the early months of 2019 rather than at the end of that year?
I'm not sure I could answer that. I mean, it is possible. Would it have been better? I'm not sure. We certainly were trying our best to address those issues, and I think everything that was raised by colleagues we were trying to deal with.
I mean, I suppose the observation, which is, it's not the person who answered that question, but it occurs to me that had stage 4 occurred at the beginning of 2019, then the challenges over reacting to the Cryptococcus cases or the chilled beams or the IMT would have been dealt with under the eye of the Oversight Board. Do you think that would have helped?
But remember the framework had been invoked in March 18, I think it was.
In stage 2.
In stage 2.
In March 18, you went to stage 2.
And there's a framework which Fiona McQueen instigated way prior to the escalation, just in the normal process. Right. When infections are not she's concerned. And then I think it was March 18 that the framework was invoked, and I think it was the 20th of March 1918.
Yes, we talked about it yesterday. You went to stage 2 at that point.
Yes, but as part of that, it was really that it wasn't the performance framework, it was the framework for infection control. I can't remember what it's called. It has a title, but I forgot what it is. And as part of that,
I think we're talking about two.
We are.
different
we are.
So I'm going to let you keep talking, and I'm going to stop trying to be helpful.
But the discussion we had yesterday was, you asked me about the thing about the lead. Remember the conversation about the lead, and I'd said it was the sole lead. Well, that was that escalation, or that
escalation
framework. So therefore, we were getting from March 18 external, more formal external support from HPS and so on. So it wasn't that there wasn't any there; that was already there in March 18.
Before we move on to the work of the Oversight Board, I reminded myself that I was asked to ask a supplementary question based on the evidence before the coffee break. Do you remember how I took you to the November last year SBAR around the reporting of those Cryptococcus cases?
Yes.
And you mentioned that you asked your colleagues to speak to RHI about the SOP that was in place.
About the issues that were raised.
The issue was raised. Can you remember which of your colleagues you asked to speak to RHI?
I think it was Professor Wallace and Sandra Devine, I think.
Thank you.
Because we were having that conversation, and it would be them who would legitimately have that conversation.
What I'd like to do is to look at the Oversight Board itself. I will come back to the case notes review in a little bit. But if we go to question 80, which is on page 86. I think it's a relatively simple question because it may be the way we ask the questions. I'm not sure you fully answered it, so I'll just try and summarize it. What's the impact of having an Oversight Board on your authority as Chief Executive, in practical terms?
What was the impact of it?
Yeah, how does it restrict you? And if it does, I mean, it may not. How does it restrict you?
In this respect, or in the other escalation, or just in terms of
the Oversight Board stage 4 escalations?
Well, there were, as I've described somewhere, about things like we had to get all of our comms agreed by and authorised by the Scottish Government, which was incredibly difficult because it took time, and we were majorly criticised by some of our media colleagues for not responding and so on. So there's things like that which were really quite difficult. Not about us being difficult, but just in terms of we were perceived to be not paying attention, if I could call it that. But actually, there was a huge amount of toing and froing where statements were changed. And then there was ongoing debate, sometimes quite a lot of times. And then clearly colleagues had other jobs, whether it was the Fiona McQueen or Craig White or indeed the Cabinet Secretary who had to authorise. So they clearly had other things as well on their plate. So some of those things took quite a long time to get authorised.
But in terms of, as you explained at the beginning of evidence, that you're, as Chief Executive, you're accountable to the Chair and through the Chair to the Board. And you described how there's a scheme of delegation for the Board. Did any of that really change when the Oversight Board, are they inserted into the structure above you, below you? Can they tell you what to do? Or can they only issue requests?
So we were duty bound to implement, if there was things that came from the Oversight Board. So they didn't have to instruct, shall we say, because we worked with them, and that was a collaborative kind of engagement, and we were trying to ensure that if there were things that were raised, and as you're aware, they had also put in place Marion Bain and subsequently Angela Wallace to support that work. So they were having a two-way dialogue with both myself and with the Scottish Government. So it worked it was quite challenging at times, but we did try to work in collaboration with them.
But at one level, and I recognise this may not be very well phrased, at one level, you and the medical director and all the other senior directors in the corporate management team have, to some degree, an ability to tell people who report to you what to do. And I wondered if the way the oversight board works is either it's a extra layer of authority on top of you that can give you instructions, or a group that effectively watches what you do, to whom you have to report, who makes suggestions.
No, I think because we're at level 4 escalation, they could instruct, but we tried to work with them so that it didn't become a kind of sorry, I need to say what I mean. So that the recommendations or views that they had were absolutely implemented. And the chair and I met with the chair of the oversight board on various occasions, and I'm sure he'll tell you when he comes. But basically to A, ensure that they were content with the progress we were making, B, to ensure that if they had information requests or information requirements that they needed, that they felt they were getting the appropriate support from the board. And in those meetings, Professor McQueen did indicate that she was satisfied with what was going on. But
well, indeed, she says
we did meet her on a regular basis to try and make sure we were doing what we were being asked to do.
She says in her statement that all requests she gave were complied with.
We did try to do that.
But she does also say in her statement at paragraph 73 that the responsibility for delivering healthcare remained with NHS Greater Glasgow throughout the period of the oversight board. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes, we were still responsible for, yeah.
And that she also says in the same paragraph, the Director of Estates and the Director of IPC reported to the board and not to the oversight board.
I think the Director of Estates certainly did report to the board, that's correct. I think the Director of IPC, who had been appointed by the oversight board or by the government, had a dual relationship, in terms of reporting and working with me, but also to the oversight board.
And did the Director of IPC have line management responsibility for the IPC team?
Yes.
Yes, you think they did? Right. Professor McQueen also explained at paragraph 82, because we asked her a question, I think, that ensuring the water and ventilation systems were compliant with guidelines, regulations, etc., was not part of the remit of the oversight board, but it did monitor the work. Would that be a fair description?
Could you read out the first part of that again? Sorry.
So the ensuring the water and ventilation system met standards, and I'm using that very loosely, wasn't part of the remit of the oversight board, but it remained the responsibility of the health board, because the stage 4 doesn't extend to, as it were, checking the buildings are compliant with standards. That remained your responsibility as a board.
But in the sense of the infection control responsibilities, then clearly it was a key part of that.
Right.
So it wasn't perhaps just as simple as that, because they're not. They are inextricably connected.
Now, before we leave the oversight board, you've explained a lot in your statement about the work of the Gold Command, and that obviously feeds into the ARG process for working on the recommendations of the oversight board and the independent review. How did you track progress on compliance with the recommendations? What was your approach to this?
Of the question 82, are we at?
We could be. Yes, we are.
Yeah. So
what was your process to make sure they were covered?
So one of the recommendations in I think in the oversight board was to, or it might be in the case note, I can't remember which, but was to actually pull together an overall action plan, and we did that. We put together all of the recommendations from the independent review, which hasn't been mentioned very much, but there was a lot of work done on that independent review as well, which had recommendations, which weren't exactly the same as the oversight board, so it was quite a difficult kind of, sometimes occasionally just a wee bit tricky to try and manoeuvre our way through that. But so the oversight board, the case note review, and the independent review, and we put them all onto an overall action plan. And we had to divide the recommendations, because some of them are kind of one-off things that you need to do. Some of them were things that you had to do in new builds, if you know what I mean, in the future, to make sure the processes were there. And some of them were an ongoing thing. So we put them all into that, and then we we allocated a lead for each recommendation, and we monitored progress through the action plan.
So when you say we, is that you or a team of people, or what's the process?
It was myself and I think the corporate directors. But if need be, I was having a conversation with a director if their part wasn't done, and I think we were given admin. Well, we allocated reasonably senior admin support to chase that up, and we also then did an audit once we'd got to a position whereby colleagues had told us that the recommendation was implemented or was in place or whatever. Then there is in the board evidence. We had pulled together some evidence to make sure that if we were asked to prove that, that we could do that. And also there was a kind of audit of, I've forgotten the number now, but it was a number of the recommendations every month or every quarter. I've forgotten exactly what it was, to make sure that if they were in place and we'd been told they were in place, that they were still in place.
And who's doing that audit?
The admin support.
Not the actual corporate director who's implementing it, but the admin support.
They were asked to produce the evidence.
I mean, at one level, there is a criticism advanced that the reason that many of those recommendations had to be made was because the health board, and led by its senior management team and its corporate management team, had not addressed those issues before. And so do you see there might be some anxiety that the board, to some degree, is effectively marking its own homework and checking it's comply with the recommendations, when, to some degree, the people who were in post when things didn't happen or happened in the way the oversight board or independent review didn't like, that actually took place?
No, I think we were required to report to the AARG, which was not quite the successor of the oversight board, but you've got that in the thing. And we were required to report to them, and they asked for evidence of same, and they asked us to explain, things that had been done and so on. So we did have quite a lot of discussion with them about whether they were content, and they had to be content, as did the NHS board. So it wasn't just a case of Jane marking her own homework, as you've put it. It was more a case of we did have external scrutiny to that.
The material that went to the ARG in terms of these audits and the reports, and I've seen some of the tables of lists and things, did they all go to board members as well?
I doubt that level of detail went to the board. They would have asked for assurance that I can't absolutely remember, but also even the ARG actually asked for, because within the report there are some areas that are very much more important than others. So there was a level of degree of discussion about some more than others, is my recollection of it.
I'm just wondering whether you've described how you and your senior management team effectively chased on the implementation recommendations. You've described how you then had a sort of internal audit by admin support associated with who weren't the directors but were working with you.
Yes.
You described how the ARG are reviewing things. And the way you described all three, it involves people asking hard questions and looking at the issues. What was the board itself, the non-executive members of the board, were they conducting any form of scrutiny audit themselves of this process, or were you just reporting to them that you were doing it?
I don't think they would come out and say, show me, these. I don't think they would personally come out and do audit, no.
Well, I mean, you sometimes get in local government, in fire and police authorities, and it's quite common in formal structures south of the border for board members, non-executive members, councillors to have scrutiny panels where they ask questions of the implementation of audit or particular assurance programs, and they themselves review material and challenge and ask questions of the officials, if not in public session, certainly in a formal setting. That doesn't sound like what you were doing with your board members.
So it would have gone through the normal committee structure.
There wasn't a separate committee.
Not that I recall, no.
No, okay. What I'd like to do now is to move on to the case notes review, which we had back on page 79. And we asked you in a sort of open questions, bottom of page 79, question 72, for what you understood about the process of the CNR from the point of view of GGC. And you mentioned first being told about it by Professor Bain in early 2020. Was that before or after the Minister had made the announcement in the Parliament?
I can't remember, but I think we would have been told before. I think probably.
You note over the page on page 80 that you were regularly involved in various working groups, as updated to high level by Professor Bain, and NHS GGC had limited involvement in establishing processes or progress, with the main input being provision of information at a very detailed level. GGC was not provided with the detailed outcome of each patient's view or the methodology associated with conclusions. Now, before we get to the draft report, which we will come to, when did you learn that GGC would not be provided with the detailed outcome of each patient's review or the methodology?
I can't remember. I'm sorry, I can't remember that.
Because
probably at the beginning, we probably knew that. I think the case note review was done over here, and as part of that, it was a separate process, if you know what I mean.
I understand that.
So I'm not certain if at the beginning they said, and you won't get the individual, or what. I don't remember that, to be honest.
What I'm wondering is whether, if you knew relatively early on that ultimately you wouldn't get the details of each case and what they thought about the question of whether there was a connection to the environment in each case, you raise that with anybody in Scottish Government or with Professor Bain as a concern?
So I think at this point we're at level 4 escalation, so we really didn't have much. It was quite a challenging time to make observations. We were trying to work hard with the case note review team. We were trying to work with these other boards that I just described, and we were at level 4 escalation, so we weren't in a position, nor did we have the capacity to get involved in every discussion with everything. But the case note review was quite a separate process.
I suppose the reason I'm asking is because down the track, not knowing the reasons for each individual decision will become a feature of the concerns raised by the board when the draft report is produced.
Yes.
And therefore, I'm wondering, it might be thought, if you don't raise the issue at the beginning and express concerns at the start, rather limits your position to complain about the outcome at the end. So
I don't think we really knew what we were told. Our main involvement in the case note review was responding to their information requests, and it was in a completely separate, whereas the oversight board was not in that, if I could contrast that. So we didn't know exactly what was happening. There was some discussion about things like the paediatric trigger tool, whether the methodology was correct or not, and the case note review team did take on board some of our consultants' concerns, and we did make some representations to them about how the case note review would be conducted. But as I say, it was quite a difficult time because we were sitting at level 4 escalation, and our main, it was reported to us by Marion Bain what was happening rather than us being involved in its drafting.
Because it occurs to me that if we look at the term of reference of the case notes review in its final report, which is bundle 6, document 38, and I think it's the foot of page 999, we see purpose. The case notes review will review the medical records of all children diagnosed with qualifying infections and who were cared for, and it gives a range of dates over the page, to establish several key issues. And one of which you see is the number of children who were likely to have been put at risk because of the environment in which they were cared. And what I'm suggesting is that either you knew or you ought to have known when the CNR was set up that that was one of the questions it was going to provide an answer to. And that's why you were giving corporately all this information. And so if there was an anxiety that you might not see the full outcome, should you not have raised the concern at the beginning?
I don't think that discussion took place at that time. In hindsight, it was more about how the questions are there, or the issues that were to be dealt with. But I think we're making a leap to and what we were told at the end, and I don't think that conversation really took place at the beginning. It was more a case of trying to make sure, bearing in mind the environment, which I've spoken to you about already, so I won't repeat it, of all the other things that were going on. So we were in a position of trying to support all of these things at an incredibly difficult time, especially as we go into later period when COVID was on and so on. It's very, very difficult.
Well, indeed, Professor Stevens describes how he only had one physical meeting with Professor Bain and his colleagues before lockdown put everything online. So I do appreciate the timings.
But also, it was if you read out a little of Fiona's statement, or Professor McQueen's statement, sorry, and talked about the information requests or something. I can't remember what you said, that we complied with her information request, but we had her things going on, and we had a lot from the case note review, and we had also information requests from the other escalation process as well. So it was a lot.
So
really a lot.
In essence, could it be that your position is that you may well have not appreciated that was the outcome, and you certainly didn't have the capacity or the status to raise the issue, even if you'd had the time?
I think we were told quite firmly that case note review was going to be managed in an independent kind of way, and that our job was to support it by producing information rather than anything else.
Well, let's step forward to the end of the process, because we've been supplied with the draft case notes review, which at the front page you can see bundle 25, document 2 at page 45. And it's February 2021. And we've heard at length from Professor Stevens how there was a response supplied by the board to this document,
Yep.
which I'm assuming you were aware of.
Yes.
Yes. I just wondered how much notice you got of this draft.
I'm afraid I can't remember.
It wasn't months or...
Oh no, certainly not months. No.
Right. So this arrives in February and it's published in March.
Yes.
And then your colleagues produce a detailed, almost line-by-line response document.
Yes.
And then you sent a letter to the expert panel on the 1st of March, which we've actually already looked at, which is bundle 25, document 3 at page 151, and it's on the 1st of March. And I'm just wondering, what was the purpose of writing this letter once you'd seen the draft?
I think it was a higher level than the detailed comments, to outline some of our more generic's not the right word, but to summarise some of the issues that had come from the.
So you're attempting to provide a sort of higher level summary to some degree?
Yes.
Right. And we've already discussed the discussion of on the 3rd page about events in 2018. What I wanted to understand is, it seems quite clear from this document and from the long document produced by your colleagues that there was a clear understanding in GDC at this point that you weren't going to see the individual assessments. Would you accept that?
Yeah, I think so, yes.
Right. And there was then a Teams meeting with the case notes review expert panel. Were you involved in that?
That around March 2021?
Yes.
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 I'll come back to that later, sorry. So you had the meeting on the 4th of March, and you wrote a second letter on the 5th of March, which is the next document at page 155.
Yes.
Now, this is quite a long letter.
I think it's that page and just a little bit on the second page.
But why did you send it, having had the presentation to Professor Stevens?
Because again, we wanted to summarise what we had discussed, and it is quite normal for us to send some sort of documentation after we've had a discussion.
Because he seems to have felt that you were trying to provide a further nudge.
Yes, I saw that, but that wasn't the case.
Right.
At all times in this, I've said, and if you go to my statement and also to the first paragraph, we entirely understand this as an independent report and it's for you to consider the content. So we understood that it was his report and that he would write whatever he thought was appropriate, but we just wanted to make sure. It's back to the point that we've discussed on several occasions over the last couple of days. It's about the balance and trying to make sure that we had a balanced approach, and that's what we're trying to do. But we were in no way trying to stop him from saying you couldn't do that. It wouldn't be. You couldn't do that anyway, even if you wanted to. But we didn't. We were trying to be. We were just trying to record the ethos of the conversation and to say that we would like to try and get some balance. So that was all we were trying to do.
Were you, as Professor Stevens put it, trying to turn the screw on him, sort of trying to make him change his mind?
No, we'd already put in the comments that we had. So we weren't. We were just trying to put our position forward, and make sure that the report was factually correct.
And what was the purpose of adding in this section about the generic email address at the bottom of the page?
I think there had been some discussion about that. I think we were asked.
Would that be at the meeting?
I beg pardon?
Would that be at the discussion?
I think so. Yes, I think so.
Okay.
I've tried hard to remember exactly the conversation from that, but there had been some discussion, as I've vaguely recall, this about the dynamics and so on, and so I think that was just to try and put some clarity on the position.
So the case notes review is published, and go to bundle 6, please. And we go to document 38, and we go to page 980. In the bullet points, bullet points 5 and 6, they set out in summary form their conclusions on whether there was any relationship between the episodes of infection and the hospital environment. And what I want to do is focus on one particular aspect of it, which, as the professor and his colleagues explained, that 30% of the 118 infections they considered probably had a connection to the hospital environment. Now, that's 33 infections. Once they're published as a final report, did NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde accept the conclusions of the case notes review on the issue of connection to the environment?
NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde accepted the recommendations because we were keen to ensure that if there was learning, that we took it on board.
Did NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde accept the conclusions of the case notes review at the time it was published?
We didn't really discuss that. It was more that we need to make sure the recommendations are implemented because we were at level 4 escalation, so we weren't in a position to for infection control. So we're in a position to start making comments about content and process and what was in the report. Our clear focus was on implementing the recommendations and making sure that the learning was taken on board. So that
You had made comments.
I beg your pardon?
You had made comments, detailed comments.
Yeah, sure.
To the authors.
But you asked me at the end of this, though. That at the end of this, we had made comments, but we decided that it was not appropriate to have an ongoing discussion about whether all the comments had been taken on board or whether they hadn't. But our main focus was on saying, okay, if external colleagues who have looked at some of this have made recommendations, we should implement them. And that was our approach.
So when you said two things, and I want to check which is right. You said it's not appropriate. You said it was not appropriate to discuss these things, but also you said you were under the stage 4. Did you have the authority to accept or reject the conclusions of the CNR as a board? Or was that restricted by the stage 4 process?
I don't know the answer to that question of whether they had the authority. I don't think it would have been wise, and the board would expect us to move forward and implement the recommendations. And
why would it not be wise to express a view on whether you accept or reject the conclusions of the case notes review?
we accepted the recommendations.
I do appreciate that, Ms. Grant. You
we
now
were
said
at
that
level
4
4
times.
escalation, and we wanted to be positive in our approach to external reviews of the process, but it was incredibly difficult at that time because we were under level 4 escalation, and also because we didn't have the detail of how those conclusions were made. So our approach to that was to say, well, if there's learning and they have outlined a number of areas where we should seek to improve, then we'll do that, and that's what we did.
Shall we look at your statement, public statement, which is, we have it in the form it was presented in the core brief. So that's bundle 25, document 61, page 1260. And in it, it states in the second paragraph, the report highlights a number of significant issues for the board. We fully accept there is an important learning for GDC and are committed to address the issues within the reports. But you don't say, we accept the conclusions of the case notes review, or we reject the conclusions. Who would read this report, this statement, and need to know what you thought? Who's the audience for this statement?
The core brief's audience is the internal.
Yeah, but this is the same words as went in the public statement as well. So who's the audience for your public statements?
The external environment.
Yes. So let's imagine for a moment that a parent of one of the children who has suffered one of the 33 infections that the case notes review have concluded have a probable connection to the environment, and is holding in their hand a letter from Professor Stevens, Professor Wilcox, and Miss Evans to that effect, with an analysis, which you don't have. And they read this statement. What are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to think it's good, they accept this conclusion I have in my hand, or they reject it? Does it not? How are the families supposed to react to you not answering the statement of whether you accept or reject the conclusions?
We weren't. So we're looking back here on I've explained to you the board's position, and I don't know if I can add anything else to that. The question was a difficult one to answer for the reasons I've already given. And what we were trying to do was say, okay, it talks about a number of issues that we had to improve, and therefore we should get on and approach them. So I don't know what was in the reports to the families. I haven't ever seen one, so I don't know what level of detail it was. I don't know any of that, and neither do any of my director colleagues. So it's quite hard to answer that, other than in the way I've already answered your previous question.
Did you think of asking
asking.
the families? You have identified, you have the list of the families who are considered by the case notes review. 3 extremely eminent people in this field, in their fields, have reached a conclusion. You don't know exactly which cases are the ones that they think have a connection to the environment, because a year and a half before it was decided, or a year before, it was decided that you wouldn't know. Do you think maybe we should contact the families and ask to see the reports so that we can learn?
No, we were told quite firmly that the board was not to see the reports by the case note review team. I'm clear of
But
that.
the system existed where the families were able to give consent for the case notes review report for their child to be sent to their own consultant.
Yes.
That existed.
But that's a different clinical conversation from the board. That's different. And that was the position.
So did you vocalise to anybody outside the board this quandary that you're describing about not feeling able to comment and therefore not commenting about whether you accept the conclusions? Discuss it with the ministers?
There was ongoing discussion about our angst about the process. There was, but I can't recall who said what to who when. But we certainly were clear about, we were concerned about the process.
So what's a parent to do when they see this statement? If they're holding in their hands a letter that says, yes, there is a connection, and your statement doesn't address whether you accept or reject the conclusions of the CNR?
I think that parents would expect that if there was recommendations, we would move forward on them, and that's what I think their concern would be. And their individual concerns were dealt with in some cases, and some parents did ask, as I understand it, to see the individual reports, but not all of them. For the consultant to see the individual reports, sorry. But I think we were not in a position to, we were told very firmly that that was not an appropriate thing for us to see.
Ms. Freeman has explained in her witness statement that she believes the board initially accepted the case notes review conclusions to avoid having a row with her. How do you respond to that suggestion?
We accepted the recommendations.
But you never accepted the conclusions?
I'm just trying to think if we were certainly concerned about the conclusions, but the key thing was to move forward and accept the recommendations to improve. That was what, so I'm not sure it was just as explicit as you're stating, but there was the difference between processing content and the implementation of the recommendations. No, I'm not sure I can.
So Ms. Freeman has said in her statement that she expected the health board to accept the conclusions of the CNR and the recommendations. Were you aware of any such expectation on her part, that you accept the conclusions and the recommendations?
I don't think it was as explicit as that, no.
Well, look, this might be quite a good time to break for lunch.
We'll do that, Ms. Grant. And if I could ask you to be back for 2 o'clock.
President.